Be careful with Nvidia's RTX 4070. There are a lot of things wrong with this GPU. Now we're starting to get slides and things about it. We can confirm the price. $599. But don't think it's all good news. They're giving us a GPU that at least isn't outrageously priced because there's a lot baked in here. We have some of the performance slides supposedly leaked by video cards with some of the performance data that the 4070 has. There's that, and then there's something even more important you should know because not every RTX 4070 will be the same. These are the two items we're going to juggle today. The slides we saw from Nvidia, and then we're going to talk about other information like Moore's Law is Dead was talking about the RTX 4070 Founders Edition versus everything else. And we know some of this information definitely makes sense. Look at what we've seen so far. The Founders Edition, the one made by Nvidia, the 4090 and 4080, for example, this generation are some of the best performing models, even including the more expensive AIB models. They often have the best build quality. They come in these super fancy boxes. It looks like an Apple product or something like that. In fact, even the outer box is similar to what you would get when you buy an Apple MPX GPU, some of the $5,000 really expensive GPUs. So the Founders Edition are definitely Nvidia's way of having a really high-end product, but they don't have the highest end price. They are the cheapest amongst all of, like, for example, the 4090 Founders Edition is $1,599. And then you have something like the 4090 Strix, which is like $400 more, but sometimes the 4090 Founders Edition, some of them are better. They have less coil whine on average, and some of the PCBs are just as good, if not better. They overclock really well, and the build quality is just as good, if not better. And in some people's eyes, the design is super premium. And now let's hear a word from our sponsor. Today's video sponsor is Jawa.gg. This is a fantastic marketplace that's very focused on gamers. You're going to find plenty of new and used hardware. You can even sell directly to Jawa. That way you can offset the cost of whatever new GPU you want to buy. I've even listed a GPU on Jawa myself, and I found it a really nice, safe marketplace. Jawa also has a pretty expansive community, such as on Discord, the weekly build emails. It's really, truly a nicely curated gaming community where you can buy, sell, and learn about PC building. And remember to use code WELCOME10 for a nice discount off of your first order. So take that we've seen, and then let's apply it to the 4070. So according to some sources like Moore's Law is Dead on YouTube and other things that we've heard, seems like the 4070, we can expect the Founders Edition to be $599. That is, of course, usually what the Founders Edition is, the base MSRP, and it's going to have like a 16-pin power connector. It's going to have some of the best specs out of all the RTX 4070s. Some of the other AIB models that may also be $599 if Nvidia forces them to stick to that price, they are going to be a lot trimmed down from this 4070. While technically they're still using, of course, the same 4070 die, it's not like they're going to give you a completely different GPU. The GPU itself at $599, let's say an AIB that's not Founders Edition, they can give you a general GPU that's just lower quality. The power is not going to be as much. It may not even use, the same power adapter that the Founders Edition would use. While on paper it could be the same specs, it's possible it's not going to reach the same type of performance as the Founders Edition because that GPU has a very unfair advantage. It's, of course, going to be the primary GPU that Nvidia develops itself, and it has its own cooler. No other company is going to sell something that's really similar to this. Every other AIB product is different. Then, of course, it's Nvidia's product, so they can stomach all of the extra expense of doing such a high-end GPU for the lowest end price. And we know how thin the margins are with AIBs. That's why EVGA got out of the game, and that's why they need to have these GPUs like the Strix and the ones that have sometimes $100 or $200 more than some of the base prices, so that way they can, bake some profit in, because the margins on GPUs, as far as we've heard in the industry, are certainly very, very thin. And Nvidia, of course, they can use the Founders Edition as like a loss leader in a way, because they're going to make money in other places. Definitely a luxury that AIB partners won't have, because they have to make money on the GPUs that they sell. And if they're forced to sell against the Founders Edition, edition, it's going to be tough because they're going to have to use not the best GPU parts that they can in order to make the price be a reality. And then it's just going to be a much more inferior GPU compared to the Founders Edition. So that's why not every 4070 is a 4070. Some are going to perform higher than others. And while you would expect that amongst GPUs for different prices, like a $599 4070, you would say, oh, maybe a $699 4070, you can expect to be overclocked or something like that. But here, we're talking about the exact same price. So that's why it makes it confusing for consumers, because then you're talking about a Founders Edition that's $599 and maybe a crappy 4070 AIB that's $599. You may need a much more expensive AIB 4070 to even match the Founders Edition, even if you can match it. Sometimes the Founder Editions are actually really, really good. And something with the 4070, you're not going to need a beefy cooler, like a 3-fan cooler or something like that, because it's going to have a lot less power draw, therefore a lot less heat. But the other end of the spectrum here is Nvidia has control over the 4070 Founders Edition, where they sell it. For example, in the US, it's only Best Buy, and sometimes they used to sell it on their website, but they changed it over to exclusively Best Buy. So that's a bit of a problem, because the cheapest and best 4070 you may not be able to get your hands on, because the Founders Edition usually sell really fast. Look at the 4090 Founders Edition. It's still hard to get today, even though you can get 4090s from like Gigabyte, Asus, and MSI fairly easily. So that means Founders Edition, the best one, $599, hard to get. You're going to look at a $599 AIB GPU, which will definitely be inferior for that price. And if you want something equaling that Founders Edition, you're going to have to pay a lot more, making the 4070 an even worse value. Now, coming to what we talked about earlier about the slides that apparently were leaked from Nvidia, here we're talking about what their performance most likely will be for the 4070. So to sum it up, they say it's going to be more or less around an RTX 3080 type of performance, even when you count DLSS without frame generation, making it DLSS 2 and not, of course, 3 with frame generation. The supposed slide, the leak, it even shows the 3080 being a little bit worse, of course, than the RTX 4070. And then it's easy to show the MSRP of the 3080 at, $699 and the 4070 at $599. But there's a lot wrong with this. I mean, first of all, that's not really a very big leap. Like if the 4070 is just equal to or a little bit faster than last generation's 80 class GPU, that's not really that big of a jump, because really, look at the 4090. That spoiled us. In some cases, it's like twice as fast as the 3090. That's a huge gap. The 4090, Nvidia should have probably done something differently. As powerful as it is, it really messed up the rest of their lineup, because then the 4080 and 4070 Ti, they all seem just really cut down from what we expected the GPU sort of hierarchy to be with the 4090. So if you look at a 4070, and we saw this with the laptop GPUs as well, with a laptop 4070 barely beating out a 3070 Ti from last generation. So it really wasn't that big of a difference. And I think the same thing is happening here. We would have expected maybe a 4070 to be at least better than a 3080, maybe approaching a 3090 or at least a 3080 Ti. So that's going to be one of the primary problems here. The GPU performance just really isn't that impressive. And while $599 certainly is cheaper than $699, we go once again back to that problem. Which 4070 are you going to be able to get for $599? It may not be the best one. The Founder Edition is really difficult to get. You may be left with getting an inferior GPU for that price, and that one may perform maybe even worse than what Nvidia is predicting here, because most likely they're going off the ideal performance of like a Founders Edition or something like that, and not like the worst case or more realistic scenario. So that's certainly going to be pretty interesting. And then to make matters a little bit more confusing, Nvidia likes to use a lot of the frame generation on their marketing specs to show the difference. That's going to be, of course, what we know as DLSS 3 with the AI or fake frames. And while overall I'm positive and I like DLSS 3, I've played various games with it and I think it is a good technology, I just don't like the way that Nvidia markets it. And then, of course, in this case, when they use frame generation, it's going to seem like the 4070 is just much better than even something like a 3080 or something like that. But then if we really break it down, not every game supports it. Not everybody wants to use it. It's not really a fair comparison, hardware to hardware over generations. So it's a little bit of a trick, if you will. Even if it works well in some cases, I don't think it's fair to lead the marketing with that. So that's why definitely a little bit sketchy. I mean, it'd be easier if they just compare the power of the GPUs without any type of upscaling and just mention it as an extra. But unfortunately, they seem to be leading with that because that's going to seem at least that the GPU has better performance and more value. So there's definitely a lot to unravel here. This is a complex GPU because it's also coming in at a price point that nothing else exists currently from new generations from AMD or Nvidia. So we're going to have a careful eye on this one, and everything that we talked about today as the launch approaches and the GPU comes out, we're going to go off in more detail and see how it plays out, because this is going to dictate the future of GPUs and other things that come out during the next few years, especially in a tough market with PC sales and GPU sales declining. It'll be interesting to see if Nvidia is going to keep raising prices or keeping prices high but give us less hardware without us noticing, shifting, different tiers of GPUs around. Maybe, something that was supposed to be a 4070 becomes a 4080, or, similar to what they did with the 4080 12GB and the 4070 Ti. So we're going to keep an eye on this. Remember to stay subscribed if you like GPUs and computer hardware like this. This is going to be a tricky GPU. We're going to wait a little bit before we make the final decision if it's a good buy or not. We're going to see the actual performance. So now it's basically just speculation. But if you get, for example, the Founders Edition at $599 and the performance happens to be a little better than we're thinking, it may actually be a decent GPU to buy, as hard as it may seem with these higher prices. But there's a lot at stake here. There's a lot that can go wrong, like getting one of the cheaper GPUs with an inferior 4070, and then it's not going to be the same. And what if the GPU doesn't perform like we're expecting? So it could easily go the other way, where it can't be recommended, much like the 4070 Ti is a very controversial GPU because of its price and some of the limitations on its performance. So remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.